Hey everybody, it's Andrew here and welcome back to the channel. So let's do an update on Social Security benefits, what's happening in the news, and how this can relate to potentially getting things like Medicare expanded, Social Security benefit payments increased, and potentially that voucher that Bernie Sanders is trying to get done as well. Now, before we jump into that, guys, do me a quick favor and hit the like button if you like this content. Also, quick reminder to get your 3 free stocks valued up to $6,300. All you have to do is click the link that's in the comments of this video. Webull is one of the most trusted stock brokerages in the world, and all you have to do is essentially 3 steps. One, sign up, which is basically just giving your email and password. Secondly, you have to actually open your account, verifying your identity, and then third, deposit at least a penny. Even if you just deposit a penny, you'll then get the 3 free stocks valued up to $6,000. So again, the link to that is going to be in the comments of this video. You could sell the stocks immediately and just use the money for whatever you'd like. So before we jump into Social Security benefits, what's happening in the news, and the fact that everyone's waiting for potentially this bonus payment that Bernie Sanders is trying to include in President Biden's agenda. Before we jump into that, let's talk about trending news. And obviously, we can't talk about trending news without talking about the global conflict. So this just broke about 20 minutes, about an hour ago this morning on Sunday morning, and it says Putin puts the nukes force on high alert. Ukrainian Russians agree to talks. So basically what this means is this is pretty scary, folks. Putin's putting the nuke team on high alert, meaning they're getting the systems ready to use those weapons if they have to. Putin, he's getting this arsenal ready. Now, is he just posturing? He has no intent of actually using these things. I think we would all hope that, and I think at first we would all think that as well. Like the thought of a global conflict involving these weapons, these WMDs, seems a little far-fetched. It's scary as well. But hopefully he's just posturing. But the facts are that he has commanded his forces to get these things ready in case they have to use them. So this is terribly frightening, folks, and it's really the last thing we need, as even though the pandemic's winding down, we're all still kind of recovering from the entire thing, how draining it's been emotionally, and it's completely insane, guys. These things are really escalating. And it looks like they've actually agreed to talk. So the president of Ukraine has agreed to meet with Russian officials. And the problem is Putin is saying he's trying to be diplomatic and speak with the president, but he's saying that at the same time while they're already invading the country, and you guys have seen what's been going on. So people are saying this is basically, how can you be diplomatic when you're blowing things up and whatnot in their country? So things are getting even more out of hand, folks. These things are really scary. And Putin himself said that the reason he decided to activate those weapons was in response to 2 things. One, in response to President Biden's sanctions, which everyone said is finally starting to be aggressive enough to really have an impact on Putin and his decisions. So basically, they're trying to cut off a lot of the banks from SWIFT, which is the global payment processing system that helps companies and banks pass trillions of dollars across countries every single day in a secure way. Cutting them off from that, cutting Putin off and the richest people in Russia off from the global system as well as other things like cutting them off from funding. So anyone who's in the US cannot fund as an investor companies in Russia and things like that. And then secondly, they're also doing this in response to the fact that countries in NATO and Europe, they're kind of, they're sending equipment to Ukraine. They're kind of gearing up their own military as well. So Russia's taking all of these things as threats, right? He's taking them as military threats, financial threats. And it's been reported that not only is the stock market in Russia tanking, but also their currency, which is called the ruble, has been dropping as well, losing strength in the world market. And some experts are saying that if this continues, the ruble could actually collapse. So basically become worthless, where you kind of like Venezuela, where you see people have to spend $1 million for a load of groceries, something like that. So this, basically these sanctions and what's happening with NATO is finally starting to scare Putin, right? Now, Putin might not want to use that word scare, but, they've basically pushed his button, and They're basically calling his hand and saying, you know what? You're going to take a hit financially unless you stop doing what you're doing, right? And obviously, his response was to be even more aggressive. And I don't know, folks, just the level of aggressiveness from Putin, the fact that he's even willing to put these nukes on high alert is just, it's shocking. I mean, to have someone that's that aggressive in control of a country like Russia, which has so many nukes, is honestly quite frightening, folks. But anyways, we will keep you updated as that develops. With that said, let's jump into Social Security benefits, what's happening with Biden's agenda, and kind of what we expect to happen next. Now, first of all, AOC and other liberals are already slamming Joe Manchin for the upcoming midterms in November, and they're saying that it's going to be Joe Manchin's fault and Kyrsten Sinema's fault if they get wiped out by Republicans and lose control of both or either chambers, the House and the Senate. Now, Joe Manchin says the opposite. Joe Manchin says that with inflation getting worse and the Democrats trying to pass another massive stimulus package, he saved Democrats from looking even worse, from spending more and potentially making inflation even worse by printing more money at a time when inflation is already going through the roof. Now, the truth is, the majority of spending in the stimulus package would have been done over 10 years. The only thing that might have affected that is the monthly child tax credit stimulus payment that families got for the last 6 months and are actually now getting back paid for the first 6 months in 2021. Now, AOC is basically saying that with those tax credits ending, those monthly stimulus checks ending, families are going to be like, what's going on here? We were getting monthly checks, now they're gone. Now we have millions of kids being thrust back into poverty. We have millions of households getting less income every single month. And, a lot of those households are going to say, wait a second, Democrats helped us, things felt better. Now they took that away, so we're not going to vote for them in the midterm elections. And that kind of makes sense. It's kind of the same thing with these student loan payments. Student loan payments have been frozen for 2 years, and it looks like as of now, those payments are set to restart in May or June. Now, if those restart in June, think about the effect that's going to have on people with student loans. Those payments were frozen. Now you're going to restart them right before the midterm elections. Voters who have student loans are not going to be happy about that, especially when President Biden promised to cancel at least $10,000 in student loan debt per borrower who has student loans. So these are things that make you think, like, especially if the student loans go back into effect, it almost feels like Democrats are trying to lose the midterms, right? They didn't get the Build Back Better stimulus package done. They didn't extend the monthly stimulus tax credit payments. They didn't expand Social Security benefits. They didn't expand SSI, SSDI, or Medicare. They didn't cancel student loan debt up to $10,000 per student. They didn't do things like the $1,000 voucher that Bernie Sanders is trying to include in this package. So, on the one hand, you can blame Joe Manchin for all of that, but at the same time, some of these things could have been done through executive action. President Biden has been really cautious about using executive action. And that's one thing that liberals are saying as well, that President Biden should be doing things like this through executive action, at least some of them. Most of these can't get done, but some of them, like they argue that the student loan forgiveness could get done through executive action. So millions of families are losing that monthly stimulus payment, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few months. If we see that families are struggling and we see that things continue to get worse with inflation, on the one hand, obviously, giving people more money could cause more inflation, but experts have shown that if you give the money to people who are lower income, that doesn't usually cause inflation because they're just using them for basic necessities and things like staying out of debt. Paying off debt does not cause inflation. It actually doesn't really stimulate the economy at all, and that's why generally economists don't like when you're paying off debt. They want you to keep pumping that money into the economy, which right now paying off debt would actually be a good thing, obviously, for the people, and it would not make inflation even worse. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with these monthly payments ending. Are people going to keep struggling worse? And if this happens, will Democrats, including Joe Manchin, respond to this and say, you know what? We should give these payments to those who are low income. We should restart the monthly child tax credit. We should do the $1,000 voucher that Bernie Sanders wants to do. All of these things, if they want to get them done before the midterms, that could save Democrats from getting wiped out by a red wave. Obviously, half of you folks vote Democrat, half of you vote Republican. So if Republicans take over both chambers, that would be a good thing for you. But when it comes to things we talk about on this channel, like Social Security benefits, Medicare, SSI, SSDI, these things most likely won't get expanded unless Democrats are in power. Now, it's possible. We have some Republicans like Mitt Romney who say they're open to expanding benefits, but of course, they would have to get at least 10 Republicans on board to even have a chance of getting that done. Now, as far as moving forward, mainly what Joe Manchin wants is tax reform. And mainly what he wants to do is a couple of things. One, he wants to roll back some of the tax cuts that President Trump put in place. And secondly, if they keep doing things like the monthly stimulus child tax credit, he wants to make sure that you are working. He doesn't want people who don't work at all to get this monthly stimulus credit for kids. Right now, or at least last year, you didn't have to work at all. And even now, if you want to claim it at the end of your taxes, you actually don't have to be working. He wants to make sure you're working and paying into the system. Most Democrats say that's a bad thing because then those who are the lowest income who need it the most won't get it at all. Of course, then he says if you're not working, you don't deserve it. So take that for what you will. Secondly, he wants to make sure that families making over $200,000 don't get the monthly stimulus check for kids at all, which honestly, folks, that makes sense. If you're making over $200,000, you, quite frankly, really don't need it. So those are really his main demands, on top of rolling back some of the tax cuts for corporations, which would help generate more revenue as well. All of this would have to create enough funding to fully pay for whatever else they're including in the package, according to Joe Manchin. I also want to point out that Joe Manchin tries to act like he's really methodical and really unemotional, but if you look back on things a couple of months ago, when he really broke down and said, you know what, the stimulus package is done, we're not doing Build Back Better, when he did that, it was really right after and in response to the fact when a leak came out saying that he didn't want to give any more monthly stimulus checks for families because he thought this was being spent on drugs. And obviously that pissed him off, and he came out and he was swearing at reporters. And shortly after that, within I think about a week, he said, you know what, we're done. We're not doing this anymore. And in my opinion, Joe Manchin's, first of all, he's a big baby. Second of all, he shouldn't be saying these things, right? Why are you saying things in private that you don't want your constituents to hear? It kind of makes you wonder what else Joe Manchin is saying in private. But I just wanted to point that out, that as clean-cut and unemotional as Joe Manchin tries to act, he really, in my opinion, broke down the stimulus package because, for selfish reasons, right? Because he looked bad, he lashed out at Democrats for making him look bad, then he canceled the whole stimulus plan, which is going to hurt millions of Americans in this country. But let's quickly take a look at this clip discussing the fact that Joe Manchin said that he was worried that people would spend the stimulus money on drugs, and that was one of the reasons he didn't want to extend it.
Julie, you are in West Virginia. I'm just wondering, any reaction from either the senator himself or people down there to what NBC News is now confirming, that behind the scenes in conversations with other senators about the child tax credit, he was saying that he was worried the money was going to go to drugs and not to kids?
Well, Katie, I've been getting a lot of reaction today from the senator's office, from advocates, and from people on the ground. And I want to start with the advocates who have been texting me nonstop, because remember, West Virginia is one of the states worst hit by the opioid epidemic. So some of them see his comments as completely tone deaf. But for the senator's part, his spokeswoman passed a statement along to NBC News saying Senator Manchin has made clear he supports the child tax credit and believes the money should be targeted to those who need it most. He has also expressed support for a paid leave program that has a dedicated, sustainable funding mechanism. Obviously, that last part, we've heard this in negotiations of Senator Gillibrand trying to get him to yes. He wants to make sure that people basically deserve to get these programs. And I spoke to a bunch of people on the ground here on both sides of this issue. He's very popular in this state. Obviously, this state has been trending more and more to the right in the last couple of decades. But I want you to take a listen to two people I spoke to today, one on one side of this issue and one on the complete opposite end.
That he would leave 350,000 children in West Virginia and their families without the certainty that they will have enough money to pay the Christmas bills, that they will have enough money to pay their rent.
I can barely put gas in my car now as it is. So, I mean, any other drastic steps that would alter West Virginia at all right now is just, it's kind of scary. I can see why Joe would be skeptical.
Spoke to mothers here who told me that last child tax credit payment they received on December 15th that made sure their kids got either extra child care during the week or an extra pair of shoes for school. They're scared they're not going to be able to provide their kids with that come the new year. And I also spoke to people like Wes. You heard from him there, who's concerned about inflation, who's working multiple jobs, and who relies on lumber, on gas to make ends meet. And if those prices keep going up, he's saying we don't need any more help like this Build Back Better legislation. We just need to control what's happening here in our state.
Shortly after that, the Build Back Better Act was put to rest by Joe Manchin. Again, for selfish reasons, in my opinion, because Democrats made him look bad. But all they did was tell the people what Joe Manchin was saying in private. And right after that, the White House came out. Jen Psaki said that they're not giving up. They're going to continue trying to work towards an even smaller package that could have some funding in it for things like Social Security, Medicare, potentially that voucher that Bernie Sanders wants to include. So that was the message from the White House, but we really haven't seen anything as far as negotiations, especially with everything happening in Russia. It seems like basically President Biden's agenda has completely been put on pause. But again, with those midterms coming up, hopefully President Biden and Democrats can start getting those talks going again. They have a strong motivation to get that done before the midterms to try and increase their numbers in the polls. It looks like President Biden's poll numbers actually just dropped even lower to under 40%. If you look at this most recent poll, his approval rating has just fallen to 37%. President Biden and Democrats are going to have to do something drastic to increase those numbers, and hopefully it's going to include things like the Medicare expansion, the voucher that Bernie Sanders wants to include, maybe expanding benefits, and maybe those monthly child tax credit payments for families. But folks, don't forget to subscribe. I will keep you posted as things develop on everything that affects seniors across the board. And with that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.